I try to imagine a fellow smarter than myself, and then I try to think, what would he do?
Charge up your axons, ready your receptors, and shift your lobes into upper beta phase. You are listening to Smart Drug Smarts, the podcast dedicated to helping you optimize your brain with the latest breakthroughs in neuroscience, nootropics, and psychopharmacology.
Hello and welcome to Smart Drug Smarts. My name is Jesse Lawler. I am your host, and I am happy to bring you the 122nd episode of this podcast dedicated to the ongoing improvement of your own brain by any and all means at your disposal. It is now April, and I remember when I was a kid, my mom would always say that spring is when a young man's fancy turns to thoughts of love, and I was never exactly sure what a young man's fancy was, but we all know what love is. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking with a doctor who's developed an interesting procedure, which she claims ties in her surgical practice with the emotional lives of her patients. She's got a growing practice, but is well outside the medically accepted standard of care. Her name is Dr. Andreet Mankala, and we're going to be speaking with her in the main interview. If you hang around until the very end of the episode, keeping on theme with springtime romance, I'm going to tell you about one animal's scheme to outwit its romantic competitors that might try to steal its sweetie pie. That'll be in the ruthless listener retention gimmick, but as usual, let's kick things off first with This Week in Neuroscience.
Smart Drug Smarts, This Week in Neuroscience.
So monkeys pretty much get to do everything cool first. First in space, famously, ahead of humans. And now the first animal to drive a wheelchair with its brain. Since 2012, neuroscientists at Duke Health have been working to develop a brain-machine interface to allow monkeys to steer a robotic wheelchair with their thoughts, motivated in this case by a bowl of fresh grapes. In the current iteration of this technology, the scientists have 300 microfibers extending into the brains of these monkeys. And those fibers are reading the electrical activity in the monkeys' brains and translating those into spatial movements for an electric wheelchair the monkey is sitting in. The long-term goal, of course, is not to have telekinetic monkey cab drivers or anything like that, but to restore mobility for the severely disabled. There are some people that are so completely paralyzed that even eye control devices or something that could be controlled by blinking isn't a really feasible solution. So a direct brain-to-machine interface is the best and only option, really, in those cases. The scientists began by reading the signals from the monkeys' brains as they moved throughout the space, seeing which neurons were active, and then eventually translating that into a sort of movement map particular to that monkey. Then they programmed the electric wheelchair to be able to respond to these thoughts, so the monkeys, rather than just putting out a signal that was connected to nothing, were suddenly giving instructions, no doubt a big surprise to the monkey. And at that point, a self-directed learning process took off. The monkeys gained better control of the wheelchair by thinking, and they became more efficient at navigating towards the grapes, completing their trials faster and faster. The scientists could also tell from the monkeys' brain signals that they were showing signs they were estimating the distance to the bowl of grapes, said the study's senior author Miguel Nicolilis. This was not a signal that was present in the beginning of the training, but something that emerged as an effect of the monkeys becoming proficient in this task. This was a surprise, and it demonstrates the brain's enormous flexibility to assimilate a device, in this case a wheelchair, and that device's spatial relationship to the surrounding world. Work on this study is continuing. They want to do a next round that has even more points of contacts inside the monkeys' brains, but eventually the goal is to get this to humans with disabilities like quadriplegia or ALS.
Smart Drug Smarts, the podcast where smart people talk about smart drugs.
It was another really busy week on email. A lot of folks apparently have found out about the show because of the episode a couple of weeks ago with Dr. Mark Mattson talking about intermittent fasting and its effects on the brain. I didn't realize quite how hot a topic that was, but if you didn't know, now you do. If you've come to Smart Drug Smarts fairly recently, we actually did a week-long water fast, myself and a handful of other listeners, a little over a year ago. We did it February of 2015, decided that we were not going to do February of this year because adding cold weather to the indignity of not getting food that you wish you were eating just seemed like it was making an already difficult situation worse. But we are planning on doing a repeat water fast this year, starting on June 5th, going the 5th to the 11th. If that's something that you're interested in and want to get involved in that, we'll be talking about it more as the time draws closer, but you can drop me an email too and just raise your hand and say, hey, I'm interested. My email is Jesse, that's Jesse, at smartdrugsmarts.com. We'll also be giving a little heads up on things like that we have going on in the background through our newsletter. We call that newsletter The Brain Breakfast. Comes out about once weekly, and you can get signed up for that if you have not done so already at smartdrugsmarts.com/newsletter. I've also been getting a couple of emails from people that are including photos of where they are when they're listening to Smart Drug Smarts. So far, the general theme looks like stuck in heavy traffic, but I know that's not the case with everybody. But next time you've got Smart Drug Smarts playing in your earbuds, whenever that may be, I guess that's right now if you're listening to this, send a photo of yourself and send it our way. We'd love to see where you're at, put together a little listener collage for sometime later on this year. I think that's all the housekeeping we've got for right now, so let's jump along to the main interview.
Smart Drug Smarts.
So I'm about to be speaking with Dr. Andrit Mancala, who is a cardiothoracic surgeon who's been operating mostly out of the Los Angeles area, but in the past couple of years has also set up a secondary practice just over the border in northern Mexico, where she has been developing an experimental procedure aimed at helping a group that's oftentimes left behind by traditional Western medicine. Hi there, this is Jesse, and I am interrupting this podcast. This is Jesse from the future, a few days after this podcast was initially released. I've got to come clean. What you're listening to is an April Fool's joke. In the initial release of this podcast, I was not giving away the April Fool's joke, but as you might be listening to this sometime long after April Fool's Day 2016, I do not want you to think that what you're about to hear in this interview is real. Keep listening if you want to. The segments surrounding the main interview in this episode are in fact real. The This Week in Neuroscience and the Ruthless Listener Retention gimmick are both true, but the interview itself is complete baloney. So fair warning, you're more than welcome to keep listening. I hope you do, but the interview is just for fun. April Fool's joke coming up next. You've probably heard of chakras. They are energy centers within the body. And just like other parts of the body, apparently they can get gummed up. Normally, people are left on their own to try to manage the health of their chakras. There's a lot of different resources for sort of do-it-yourself chakra repair. But oftentimes, the very people that need the most help in this area are less than able to self-serve their problems. So a couple years ago, the light bulb went on for Dr. Mancala. We use donors for lots of things. We could replace an eye. We can replace a kidney. Why can we not yet replace a chakra? And so she's developed a practice based around research and eventually live human experimentation following that idea. She's got a website set up at chakratransplant.com where you can go, you can see the gadget that we talk about in the interview. We're going to be speaking with her. We're also going to be speaking with, his first name is Jeff, and Jeff is Dr. Mancala's very first patient, the first recipient of a chakra transplant. We're going to be cross-cutting between both these interviews with Dr. Mancala and Jeff because they both kind of feed into one another. So now let's jump in and hear what they have to say.
I began studying medicine at Oxford in 1989, and I became a surgeon with a dual specialty of cardiothoracic and neuro at 31. At the time, I was very interested in how and why the major organs would shut down. So what I was discovering was that there are hundreds of cases of heart attacks where the patient had no previous heart conditions or any of the normal signs of an unhealthy heart. There was no blockage of the arteries, there was no plaque buildup actually causing the attack. We were seeing relatively young, relatively healthy individuals having a major shutdown of one of their most vital organs for what appeared to be no reason.
Yeah.
And what I was realizing was that there was just some things that Western medicine was not able to explain. The answers I was looking for just did not exist yet.
You were saying before we started recording that you'd kept aware of your own personal chakras, but that had not initially touched on your medical practice.
This is what I was getting at. So the chakras are where I decided to focus my studying. There are 7 main energy centers in the body. They are known as chakras. Each chakra is located throughout our body, so it correlates to a specific body ailment and physical dysfunction. This was only a small leap for me because my mother is Indian and I was raised Hindu, so I always had a practice of yoga and a relationship with energy and meditation. But as a surgeon, it had never occurred to me to combine these two parts of myself. So as you can imagine, it's very difficult to extract a donor chakra because we cannot see it. We cannot really feel it tangibly.
Maybe a great place to start actually would be to tell me about your initial procedure, your first patient, what kind of led you down this road.
Let me tell you about Jeff. So he was my very first transplant patient. He actually came to me with a heart condition. He had a congenital heart defect, which means he was born with a defective heart. His particular condition is called hypoplastic left heart syndrome, HLHS. It's an underdeveloped left side of the heart. The aorta and left ventricle are too small, and the holes in the artery and the septum did not properly mature and close when he was he was born this way.
Yeah.
So it's very, very difficult to treat, and he had countless surgeries as a child and into his adult years. He came to me, because I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon, he came to me for a cardiopulmonary consultation, and I really did not think opening him back up was a good idea. He was very weak, his body had been through enough, he just was not a good candidate. I wanted to find a better way.
I had a bunch of surgeries, and obviously they kept me alive, and they were much more functional and practical. But yeah, if you spend your whole life sort of unhealthy and really kind of unhappy, it definitely puts you in a position to be willing to try anything.
Some of his other symptoms included gastrointestinal issues, as well as some sexual dysfunction and an inability to commit to relationships. Most of my colleagues could not find a link between these symptoms, but I did extensive interviews with him and discovered he had never never been in love. He was not able to maintain a healthy, committed relationship, both of which are related to the heart and the sacral chakras. So together, we decided the best course of action was to try a chakra transplant procedure I had been working on first. And then if that did not work, of course, I would open him back up again. I would try to repair the heart valve.
Not a lot of these procedures have been done yet. How did you feel going in and kind of being a guinea pig?
At that point, I didn't have a whole lot to lose. I was very selective with who I told. I only told family members who I thought would be somewhat open to it and close friends. And everybody else, I just sort of told them, I was going to have an experimental surgery.
You say that so lightly.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. But since they all knew my medical history, I think they were willing to believe that was a possibility. But, I certainly didn't get into details with everybody because I knew there would be a lot of skepticism, including my own.
How do you know, like in Jeff's case, what is your decision process that says I'm going to put my surgeon's gloves on and do this in the traditional way versus a chakra-based therapy?
First and foremost, I am a surgeon. I want to treat it by fixing the problem and getting to the problem. It's only been in my later years that I've learned some of these problems are interrelated, and oftentimes if you start with the easier treatment, which is the chakra therapy, you might be able to avoid surgery altogether. Also, I do extensive interviews with my patients to see if there are significant emotional issues attached to the physical issue. If someone is coming to me and they are having a heart problem, they have a congenital heart disease, for example, but they are completely able to love, they have never had any other issues that are typically coincide with the chakra issue, then I don't even think about it. I just go in, I fix the heart. But when I interview them and I discover they're not able to accept love, they feel no self-worth, and they maybe also have some gastrointestinal or gut problems, that's when I know that we might be dealing with an energetic blockage as well. Because, it's one thing to clear the veins, it's one thing to clear the arteries and remove blockages and put in a stint or whatever I need to do to clear the blood flow. But if the energy flow is still blocked, those problems will recur.
Can you tell me again about the actual device that you use to bring the chakras in and out?
It's going to be hard to explain. You can see a picture of it on my website. But
what's your website name, by the way?
Chakratransplant.com.
Okay.
It looks like a pump, but it is actually energetically breaking up the connective surfaces of the chakra that hold them to the spine. As we grow, they become more embedded within us. When we're born, all this energy is all flowing within and growing. But as you get older, your chakras become more set within your body. They become more and more attached. So this device that I use to pump it out, and they feel it when it pops out. It pops out. It's crazy. You can actually hear the noise of it pop.
How did it feel afterwards? Was there like a moment where you felt things fall into place? Or
it was interesting. There was definitely right away there was a difference, but it didn't feel great or, a whole different world. But yeah, I would say a week later, it was a combination of feeling like a weight had kind of lifted, but also I did feel almost as if there was something foreign in my body. And even though it was exciting and it felt different, I definitely felt like I had to kind of turn my mind off to the idea of rejecting it.
Do you ever get a recipient that would reject a chakra the way that an organ transplant is sometimes rejected?
No, quite the opposite, in fact. The chakras want to be taken in. They belong with the key, with the energy of the human experience. So they will take right away.
When you got back to friends, family, and stuff like that, I almost imagine this is one of these things like where somebody gets a haircut and you're like, something's different, but I can't tell what. What sort of did people notice about you?
There was a shift. I think it's one of those. I guess I would liken it to when people say a pregnant woman has a glow. There's no real definition of what that means, or there's not like a physical, obviously a pregnant woman doesn't actually glow in the dark, but there's something about them. There's something you're picking up on. And I think for me, like I said, I've been sick for most of my life, and there's a lot of emotional stuff that goes with that as well. And I think as time went on, that lifted so much that, it starts to show in your face. It starts to show in how you carry your body. And then there's also just the imperceptible stuff that just people pick up on energy, whether, they know it or not. And I definitely had that experience.
So I guess I'm thinking about this mathematically. So if we have 7 chakras, if somebody gets one of their 7 replaced, I mean, is that like a 1/7 change in his personality as a result?
It depends on how, dysfunctional the chakra was to begin with. If it was a mildly dysfunctional chakra and everything else was in perfect condition, then you'll just see a whole person. You'll just see a slight change where everything is just a bit better. It's when you come out of a depression and all of a sudden you're yourself again. You're still yourself to begin with, but you're just the more happy, improved version of yourself. And when the physical manifestations of these issues go away as well, when you aren't dealing with, Jeff had horrible gastrointestinal issues as well as his heart. And when those went away, his daily life improved vastly because he was not constantly sick,
So I'm trying to think of a way of asking this delicately. Yeah. Something that you had done to sort of, blown out your original chakra. Are you concerned that there's a chance you might do something to damage the new one also?
Well, yeah, that is a good question. That is something I've been relatively concerned about, but more, I guess, in the beginning, when it didn't feel quite incorporated with my system. And I don't know if this is placebo effect, but since the procedure, I've been able to find love in my life and feel more satisfied. So I feel those things in my life are actually feeding into the chakras and keeping them healthier than they ever would have been before. I don't know. I guess it's a possibility, but, I think I might be more aware if there was some sort of problem now than I ever would have been before.
Jeff is a completely different person now. I would not believe it if I had not seen it with my own eyes, but his heart is healed. It is not perfect, but it is healed. His sexual drive is through the roof, and his gastrointestinal issues are completely gone. And the last time I spoke with him, he was engaged to the love of his life.
It sounds like this whole experience has sort of made you a more spiritual person. Has this changed sort of your belief systems or practices?
Yeah, I'm from the Midwest. We didn't have a lot of Eastern influences growing up. I was pretty practical. My parents were pretty practical about, my heart condition and things like that. And, I just sort of assumed, because I'd gone through so much as a kid, that I wasn't going to be able to find love, and my stomach issues and everything that kind of went along with it was just a result of those things. And it never occurred to me to try to seek a spiritual cure. I figured, hey, I'm alive. I may not be perfect, but that was just my luck in life that this is how I am.
How did you first come across the doctor's work?
Well, through much more practical Western medicine. She's highly regarded as a surgeon, and her name just came up through a business conference. And I had started to feel a little bit worse, I've had surgeries as a child and in my adult life, but I could tell something was happening, and maybe I was headed down a bad path. The medication wasn't working the way it had been. I just, low energy and all that sort of stuff. So, I figured I should maybe just start with a new doctor, seek more consultation. And just the way luck has it, I stumbled upon Dr. Mancala. So, and, we didn't even get into this sort of stuff until we had been consulting for a couple months. I admit it was a little weird when she was asking me sort of about my romantic life and things like that. But now I kind of see how all that stuff is related. I always thought it was because I was shy because of my scars and things like that. But I'm willing to believe now that it was partly due to, a diminished chakra. So
So let's get into the actual extraction procedure a bit from the chakra donor. If I'm in a car accident or something like that and I die, but I've got organs that can be delivered, there's a period of hours, I guess, where if the paramedics act fast, they can get those organs to somebody else. What's the analogous situation like with a chakra?
Even less time than with a vital organ, because the energy dissipates so very quickly. It's almost immediate, which is why the best donors are actually in hospice. They know they're going to die. They're willing willing to give a part of them to someone who needs that part of them. And they are available, and we can all it's a very prepared procedure. But what's even more difficult than that is removing the bad one. I have a device that I created. It almost looks like...
Yeah, I saw the photo on your website. There's a bunch of people in the photo, but it almost looked like a big billows.
Right, yes. So it looks like this. It's not as crude, it's medical equipment, but it looks a bit like this, but it is actually extracting energy out of the body. It's forcing the energy to break loose around the chakra so that it can actually come out. And when you extract the donor chakra, it's actually very, very easy.
I got to admit, I'm imagining like the thing from Ghostbusters that they suck the ghosts into and then they hustle it into the containment unit.
It's not like that, but I can see why you would think that, but there are some similarities.
So the procedure as it is now, this is not something which is sanctioned by the US FDA. It's outside the standard of care for medical practice. Your website is chakratransplant.com, but you're operating just over the border in Mexico?
I am currently. It's not exactly FDA approved yet in America, obviously. It's a very new practice, but I find that I can be close to patients who need me. I do have patients from all over the world, but most are from the United States.
Now, did you know anything about the donor, or is that something they kind of keep secret for purposes of privacy?
Right. No. Well, this is a little bit different. I actually met my donor on my own, and it was sort of just sheer luck. I actually met my donor in the hospital.
That's the crazy part. A week later, after we made the decision, a woman came into the hospital where he was, who was one of the most gentle, loving, open souls I have ever encountered.
And she was in hospice and nearing the end of her life. And I was actually waiting because I was just nervous. And she kind of noticed what I was doing, and we struck up a conversation. And, I was a little hesitant in bringing up what I was going to attempt to do. Anyway, we got talking. She was a wonderful, wonderful woman. Ended up being totally willing to help me.
I don't know how to explain this, but there was just a connection between them. Jeff is actually the one who came to me saying he thought he found his donor. He had set it all up, and she was truly willing.
Yeah.
So when she passed, I did the transplant.
It was one of those things where she didn't have anything to lose, but the connection, the personal connection, I feel was very helpful in this circumstance. And it helped sort of incorporate with my system, because I feel like maybe a stranger, I don't know, maybe it wouldn't have been as successful.
This is still considered a controversial practice, even for people that are working within the field of energy medicine. When people are objecting, what are the objections you're getting?
Well, just with any new procedure or discovery, there has not been enough data to support what I'm doing. But just as with the first organ transplant, it had to be done in order to study the result. And this is how medicine improves upon itself. Well-qualified doctors and scientists like myself having an idea and changing the way we perceive what we thought we knew. I know it is hard to wrap your brain around this. I know this, but all I can say is we're proving it day by day.
This is way more of like an ancient, our connection to the universe sort of stuff. I mean, that's a lot to give over to. But again, I think where I was coming from, not only physically, but emotionally, and, I was willing to kind of try anything. And yeah, now I do believe this stuff. Absolutely.
What is your long-term vision for this? Would you like to see checkboxes on driver's license renewal forms in 10 years where people can opt in to be chakra donors the way that they can opt in for being organ donors now?
Obviously, my goal would be to heal the entire world. That's what I set out to do as a doctor in the first place. But you have to be hiding under a rock if you think that, Western medicine is 100% for human good and not at all related to profit. Okay, and I take a risk by saying that, but doctors with integrity will tell you this over and over. We swore an oath to never do harm and to have the health of our patients as our primary intention, but Big Pharma did not swear this oath. They have sworn an oath to their board members and shareholders to create drugs and medical equipment at as high a profit as possible. And that's really all I want to say about this, because it is a double-edged sword. As a doctor, I do need the medications that they have created and patented, but why is there a patent in the first place? Why is medicine not available for the common good? Because there is money to be made, a lot of it. And until they can figure out how to monetize what I am doing, they will never approve it.
What are the costs like if somebody wants to get this procedure performed?
I only charge my patients the cost of the comfort of the donor, because those people are at the end of their life. they are already in hospice. They are giving up a part of themselves to a recipient, and the recipients are sick. They need help, and this is experimental still. So I'm not going to make a profit. All I'm going to do is cover the costs of the actual donor in hospice and the recipient, their care in the hospital afterward. I don't need to charge for this. This is something I'm doing to help people.
The chakra that got removed from you, what wound up happening to it?
I guess energy just kind of dissipates is how it was explained to me. I don't think you can store it in a jar somewhere.
Flush it down the toilet or anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, it's not going to be beneficial to anyone else, So I think it just has to be released into the universe again.
Smart Drug Smarts.
So thank you so very much to Dr. Andreet Mankala and to Jeff for taking the time to share their stories and explain this technology. I had not heard of any of this at all. I ran into Jeff through a friend of a friend in Los Angeles. Southern California is probably the place in the world where, outside of India, most people have heard of chakras. And, related or not, probably also one of the places where people have the most chakra problems. There's definitely a little bit of a Me Too syndrome sometimes going on with, oops, I stubbed my chakra. But if for other people, this can really be a very serious concern. So again, check out that website if you think it's something that could be helpful to you or somebody that you know. This is outside the standard of care, but still could be worth taking a look at chakratransplant.com. Now, let's move on to the ruthless listener retention gimmick.
Smart Drug Smarts. Ruthless listener retention gimmick.
Finding out that your fling partner is sneaking off into the bushes with somebody other than you. That is the common plight of a bird called the Australian red-backed fairy wren. And these birds are little Lotharios. The males of this species apparently take great pride in sneaking over to the nests of females that have been cavorting with rival males, singing a little love ballad and seeing if they can impregnate those females when the other males aren't around to keep that from happening. And this happens a heck of a lot. Apparently made easier because while one male's off wooing somebody else's girl, somebody else will show up at his doorstep and woo his girl. And so it's sort of a big game of musical chairs or musical female Australian red-backed fairy wrens. So this is a highly competitive sexual environment, and DNA paternity testing of these birds has showed that over 60% of the babies wind up being fathered by a male that did not actually share their nest. So with all these dalliances going on, the scientists were wondering which males were being more successful. What were the few males doing that were successfully managing to raise their own children rather than somebody else's? They were thinking that it had to do with violence, kind of the, I'm going to guard my woman with a shotgun mentality translated into fairy wren, because some males would get a lot more aggressive, flying over to peck and stuff when another male would show up in their territory and start singing love songs, which you could imagine being a fairly suspicious behavior. To test this theory, scientists built fake little fairy wren lookalikes out of wire and some feathers and put little remote control music players inside of them so they could have the fake birds sing love songs. And then they'd have these little fake birds show up in the bushes outside of the nesting area, start singing their love songs, and see how the birds, both the females and the males, behaved. Did the females sneak off to see who this attractive stranger was? Did the males throw a temper tantrum and go to attack the thing? And in some cases, that did happen. There were various levels of aggression and defense among the males that it seemed like were going to get cuckolded by these fake birds. So they got to know the psychological tenor of these birds pretty well. Needless to say, the fake birds were not ever going to impregnate the real birds, but they could sort of check back at the end of the season, knowing each of these birds' personalities and see which birds wind up getting cuckolded and which ones don't, based on the DNA tests. But it surprised the scientists to find out that there was not really any clear prediction based on how aggressive a male was at defending his nest as to whether he would get cuckolded or not. Cuckolded, just in case you're not familiar, is the scientific term for having somebody who's not you impregnate your special lady friend. But they did find one significant predictor of the male and female birds that actually nest together also producing children together. And that was singing. There were some of these birds that when a rival male would show up and start sort of singing off in the bushes like, hey, come this way, the nesting male would start singing himself, and sometimes the female would go into a duet with him, and so the sort of two nesting birds would sing this duet together. Sometimes this happened, sometimes this didn't. But the duet singing was a significant predictor of the likelihood of these nesting birds making babies. Some bird pairs had a strong duet singing response, others not so much. Said the study's lead author, scientist Emma Grigg from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Pairs were less likely to mate outside of the pair bond when they sang together more. But the big picture question is about how animals make mating decisions. Our results suggest that the females are deciding what males to cuckold. Females are either being influenced by their mate's songs, or they're indicating their own choice by singing with their mates more. We need more detailed work to distinguish these alternatives. How this research might apply to human courtship is not commented upon, but probably pulling out a ukulele every now and then and doing a love song with a lady is not a bad idea.
We like to think of ourselves as a digital speakeasy for brain hackers, but you can call us Smart Drug Smarts.
Okay, you heard it. That is the entire episode, number 122, coming in for a landing. Thank you for hanging around until the end. All the links to everything that we spoke about here will be up online at smartdrugsmarts.com/122. Last week, if you missed that one, we talked with CEO Neil Thanadar of the company Labdoor, which does supplement quality testing. And next week, I'm going to be speaking with the author of what was literally my favorite nonfiction book last year. It is highly neuroscience relevant. I think the book came out in 2014. I'm not even going to tell you what it is. I'm going to leave you on the edge of your seat for a week, but it'll be worth checking back next Friday to find out in episode number 123. Reminder, if you haven't signed up yet for the Smart Drug Smarts mailing list, we got that at smartdrugsmarts.com/newsletter. So I will see you back here next Friday, same time, same podcast, and with that same unflagging commitment to helping you fine-tune the performance of your own brain. Have a great week and stay smart.
You've been listening to the Smart Drug Smarts podcast. Visit us online at www.smartdrugsmarts.com and subscribe to our mailing list to keep your neurons buzzing with the latest in brain optimization. Smart Drug Smarts should be listened to for entertainment purposes only, although some guests on the show are medical doctors, most are not, and the host is just some random guy. Nothing you hear on this podcast or read at smartdrugsmarts.com should be considered medical advice. Consult your doctor and use some damn common sense before doing anything you think might have a lasting impact on your brain.